sharing durian ASEAN.
Hey, this is Arlene.
And this is Gowri.
And you're listening to Durian ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing.
And we're moving on to our ABC dialogue for this morning.
Of course. And today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic. And I think it will get the attention of a lot of Indonesians as well.
Yeah, we're talking about the upcoming July 9 presidential elections in Indonesia, where the current battle is pretty tight between Joko Widodo and Prabowo Subianto, who are the two finalized candidates. So let me just give a little background to the topic. So it will be the fourth time Indonesia has held election since President Suharto resigned in 1988 after 3 decades in power, even amid violent anti-government protest. And this parliamentary election will elect representatives for both the national and regional legislatures.
So just to be clear, the third Indonesian presidential election will be held on the 9th of July 2014. Why is the third? Because after the fall of Suharto, so there were a few other more presidents were being elected as well. So this is this presidential candidate, which if he is being elected, he will be his term will last for the next 5 years. And there are two, like you mentioned, president candidate plus his runner-up. The mix is Prabowo Subianto together with his vice president candidate Hatta Rajasa, as well as the running against Joko Widodo with his vice president Yusuf Kala.
Yep, that's right. And
Yusuf Kala.
The Indonesians will vote for a new House of Representatives and Senate, as well as local and provincial assemblies on April 9. And that's 4 elections for the price of 1, as reported by the Financial Times. And only political parties that get over 25% of the vote or 20% of the seats in the House of Representatives can nominate a presidential candidate. So who is taking part in these elections? There are actually 12 national parties contesting the elections and 3 provincial parties taking part in the local elections in the semi-autonomous Aceh. And the thing about this presidential election is the Indonesians will only know who the official presidential candidates are once the results from the legislative elections have been tabulated and released. But of course, all that is done now, and we are down to Joko Widodo and Prabowo Subianto, as we all know.
So just to start off our discussion today, I think we should share with our audience here the personality and the background of both candidates, Joko Widodo and Prabowo Subianto. So as we all know, the Joko Widodo, he's the presidential candidate for PDIP, and Prabowo Subianto is the presidential candidate for Gerindra.
And the two candidates are a study in contrast. And Joko Widodo, who is popularly known as Jokowi, is a middle-class furniture and entrepreneur who served as mayor of the middle-sized city of Surakarta in central Java, where he built a consensus for a series of good government reforms that attracted nationwide attention. And enthusiasm for his approach in Surakarta propelled him to an upset victory in the capital, Jakarta, 500 kilometers away in 2012 election.
And he has been the governor for Jakarta since September 2002. Like you said just now, he has been done a couple of reforms in Jakarta and a lot of positive things happening in the state itself.
So some polls note that Indonesians admire his reputation for probity and record as an effective administrator, as well as his regular guy demeanor, as we mentioned a few times.
He's always been seen as a person who is humble and completely untarnished by corruption, which I think is the key, I would say, advantage for Jokowi. I think corruption has been a huge problem in not just in Jakarta itself, but also in the whole of Indonesia.
Right.
And having a clean slate personality that is against corruption is definitely a boost for his background. And he is also a person that has the ability to get things done quickly. If he wants to reform a certain area or to develop a certain area, he will just do it. So I think it's a very good, that definitely boosts his background. And also, Jokowi's election as the governor of Jakarta was also noteworthy because Basuki Tjahaja Purnama, or Ahok, has running mate now deputy governor, is a member of the two minority groups. He is Chinese Indonesian and a Christian. Whether Jokowi and Ahok can fix Jakarta's very challenging infrastructure, drinking water and flood problem remains to be seen, but they appear to have made a promising start, a fact that adds to Jokowi's allure as the presidential candidate.
Yeah, and also Prabowo has staged a further comeback in the recent months, with polls showing him surging from a distant second to just a 15% deficit against Jokowi in mid-May. That was Prabowo, actually. And many voters see him as the strong, tough leader Indonesia's noisy democracy requires. So Prabowo is seen more as the tough guy, the military guy, the one
that has been affiliated with during the Suharto regime as well. While Jokowi, he's seen as the new wave of change for Indonesia, and some even quote him as being similar to Barack Obama, which I thought is kind of interesting. He even looks similar to Barack Obama, to the extent.
He's got that lean, skinny frame.
Yeah, it's astounding in a way.
And just to talk a bit more about the elections, there are actually 186 million voters, about 4.5 million election officials, 550,000 polling stations, and more than 19,000 seats that's up for grabs, which is a serious logistical challenge. But for 15 years after the first national elections of Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim majority nation is actually rising to the task.
Interesting, very interesting. About Prabowo, I think we should focus on Prabowo since we already talked about Jokowi a lot. Like you said earlier, he is seen as the tough guy, the military man. But one thing that I think we should highlight about Prabowo, he also have a bad track of human rights abuses. For example, while Prabowo commanded two elite units, Kopassus and also Kostrad, he was suspected of being responsible for human rights abuses in East Timor as well as during the 1998 riots in Jakarta, which cast a pall over his political ambitions and prompted the United States to deny him a visa in 2000. So I thought it's kind of interesting that despite of that, Garinda has tried to remake his image, citing Prabowo's commitment to religious and ethnic plurality and his decisive managerial style, which contrasts sharply with the incumbent president's reputation for indecisiveness. So I guess the strong point of Prabowo, like you said just now, he's strong. He's not indecisive. He knows what he wants to achieve for Indonesia. I think that's his strong point. But at the same time, we can't help to see that he still have a huge baggage behind his back on the human rights abuses happening in the past.
That is true. And also his party, Gerindra, is actually a well-funded party backed by his tycoon brother.
Oh, wow.
Is primarily his primary vehicle for his presidential ambitions. And Prabowo is also quoted to be a Suharto-era figure who has staged a remarkable political comeback after his dismissal from the military in 1998, following the kidnapping of student activists at the end of Suharto's rule, for which a military board found him responsible. So I guess that goes back to what you mentioned earlier about his human rights abuse.
Yeah, that's true. Talking about human rights abuses, I think it's important to highlight that Indonesia is a very huge country, and a lot of in a lot of events happen within the different state of Indonesia. I mean, there are still ethnic riots and civil unrest in certain parts of Indonesia, which needs to be addressed, of course. And I think adopting a more plural focus on the future of Indonesia is definitely a key point in addressing the issues, especially on religious minorities, their rights and their protections. So I think we also need to address the party manifesto as well, and as well as the political parties. I just want to give just a brief introduction to different political parties and their leaders. So for Democratic Party of Indonesia is headed by Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono. Party of Functional Groups, or Golkar, popularly being called, is headed by Abu Rizal Bakri. Indonesia Democratic Party Struggle, PDIP, which, as I said, is being headed. The leader is Megawati, but I think right now the presidential candidate is Jokowi. And other parties such as a National Awakening Party, United Development Party, Prosperous Justice Party, I like the names, National Mandate Party, People's Conscious Party, Great Indonesian Movement Party. And one thing I really salute with Indonesia is the diversity of the politics there. I mean, I think democracy has definitely enhanced the democratic processes in Indonesia, having a lot more political parties to put in their efforts to ensure that more people are being represented. And there are also besides political party, a huge influence in Indonesian society psyche is also organizations such as Muhammadiyah, Nahdlatul Ulama, and Sarekat Islam. These organizations are really huge. They have a lot of members, and the leaders itself influence the mentality of the people there. But they remain a civil society, as in like they don't dwell into politics, although their members come from different political parties' representatives.
Yeah, and going back to what you mentioned about the manifesto, I just have a few key words here for Jokowi, where his party, which is the PDIP, which is what you just mentioned, and he's focusing more on things like national security, also a very free and active foreign policy, and also looking to develop an educated nation. He's trying to emphasize a lot on education to come up with a more competitive and a productive nation, because he thinks that it's only through education that people can compete with each other, and when there is a healthy competition, the productivity will increase, and that will of course eventually impact positively on the country. And he's also going for an independent maritime constituency.
Interesting. So I guess we need to break down all the different political manifesto. I think we should start with the domestic politics of the country itself. What is the focus of the two presidential candidates? Do you have any information on that?
I do have an article here by the Jakarta Globe, where they say that this is as of April, where Joko Widodo lays out agricultural manifesto for Indonesia. So it seems that he said that there are many productive agricultural lands that should not be converted into other use, such as residential or industrial areas, and instead they should be preserved. And he said that these farmers would also have to be assisted in making sure that even the smallest plot of lands are used productively, and that farmers are educated not to use chemically engineered seeds or pesticides.
Interesting.
But I read some comments as well that said that this is nothing new, that someone has come up with this agricultural plan before, and it's not originally by Joko Widodo, and they expect something more from him, really.
I'm trying to look at the popularity poll in terms of their domestically. It seems like Prabowo is heading majority of the polls. He's quite popular among the younger generations, especially. Also, he's quite popular among the majority of Indonesian society, which comes from the middle class to lower middle class background. Well, I think Prabowo, that's Prabowo. I make a mistake between Prabowo
Right.
and also Jokowi. Prabowo is the one heading the polls in majority of the polls being created by all the different institution and think tanks. It seems like Prabowo is the choice, and partly because even though, like I said just now, Jokowi is famous among the younger generation and among those who wants to create a more who wants to create a more equal society, I guess, because majority of his supporters come from the poor, as well as the middle class. But Prabowo exert more power in the sense that the middle class and the upper middle class provided a lot of support to him,
Right.
and he has been in politics for quite some time. I think there's a lot of trust in him as well.
So going back to Prabowo Subianto, just to go through some of his promises or his manifesto, he is focusing more on a democratic and an independent Indonesia. He's working towards a pro-people economics, which is, I think, a very important thing to address because they are going through a huge economic, I wouldn't say catastrophe, that's probably too strong a word, but they are having a huge problem with the gap between the rich and the poor, and a lot of people are living below the poverty line. And he's also focusing on social welfare systems and in terms of health, religion, cultural, and even sports. So I think that actually kind of makes him stand out a little bit. And he's also focusing on infrastructure development, environmental preservation, and also looking to achieve a corruption-free Indonesia.
And from my opinion, and I think it's the opinion of a lot of articles being written about the presidential election, I think what would determine the choice of presidential candidate, I think it would be on the economic issue. And I think economic is also one of the major debate among the two candidates as well. I mean, they one thing I think is really interesting about the current presidential election is they have open debate where it's being televised to all television channels. I'm not sure to all television channels, but to the televisions in that people can view it in front of their in their living room and make the judgment by themselves which candidate they trust the most in terms of, or which candidates have the best policy that is suitable for Indonesian people.
I think that's a very good move by having that dialogue because I don't think we get that kind of thing here, and we're not too clear. Usually, the manifesto is circulated on the internet. We don't actually get to hear both sides on a national TV.
I totally agree with you. I have to go back to Malaysia, the country of origins of here. I think having a presidential debate is important in a way that we need to know who are our presidents and who are our political leaders. Even though we don't have presidential election in Malaysia, but at least the political party coalition leaders should be the one who heads the agenda and party manifesto and educate the society, like what kind of agenda you want to bring forth to Malaysia, what is the direction of Malaysia that you foreseeing. And I think it's definitely a positive move for the both presidential candidates to be appearing on national TV.
Yeah, and it will be more clear for the people as well to listen and to slowly decide, carefully decide, to see who could be the most suitable president for the country.
So we will take a short break, and I think when we return back, we will definitely discuss more on the different agendas and political reforms that both candidates want to bring forth, as well as the feedback and the reaction of Indonesian people on the current presidential elections. Stay tuned.
The voice of sharing. Durian ASEAN.
Hi, we are returning back with more discussion on the Indonesian presidential election, as well as analysis on their party manifesto. So, what about their economic policy? What kind of changes that they want to bring forth?
I think for Jokowi, like I mentioned earlier, his economic approach is to have encourage more free and active policy, and as well as focusing more on agriculture, and try to bring up Indonesia in that sense. Whereas for Prabowo, his economic approach is a more pro-people economics. Maybe do you want to explain that a little bit, what he means by pro-people economics?
I guess when it comes to pro-people economics, it seems like he wants to have an economic that is much more open to reforms, as in like people will get benefit on it, as in like in terms of employment, and in terms of the GDP of the nation, and in terms of how the direction of the future economic in the country. But I think we also need to realize that is there any differences in terms of the economic policy between those two candidates? I mean, for me, instantly, I think their future, their focus, their economic focus is probably the same, similar in a way.
And also, I think how I have an article here on how Indonesia's foreign policy might change after the elections, and it seems that according to this article, the foreign relations under Joko Widodo can be hard to ascertain, because he has very limited international experience and has issued little commentary on international affairs. And even the closest media coverage of Jokowi seems to get to touching upon international issues, discussions like his favorite band, Metallica. I think that's quite hilarious. And but it also says that Subianto has given a stronger indication of his positions on the Australia-Indonesia relations.
I see, that's interesting. So, in a way, I think the future of Indonesia is definitely a good one in a way in terms of their economic policy. But at the same time, I'm quite I would say I'm still quite uncertain whether it would address. They actually want to seriously address the issues of inequality in the country.
And also, Jokowi, it says here that he could, although he's seen, like what you said earlier, that he's seen as the new Barack Obama, he's the hope for change and all. But according to this article, a lot of people are actually observing that he could never have risen to this position without getting involved in any dirty money politics as well.
That's interesting. What else that you found out about the presidential elections in terms of their policy?
In terms of the policy, I guess not so much on the policy, maybe more on like the approach, where they say, unlike Yudhoyono, most other politicians with national aspirations, Jokowi did not form a new party to contest the election, but instead he is joining the established Indonesian Democratic Party of Struggle, which is the PDIP, and we talked about that earlier. And it seems that I also have an article here that said that the way things are going now, actually Prabowo stands a higher chance of winning the presidential elections.
I see. That's interesting. But I also want to highlight the foreign policy of both individuals. It seems like this with the presidential debate that happened between both candidates, Jokowi outlined a well-structured foreign policy vision in around 500 words. He detailed four foreign policy priorities. Number one, promoting the archipelagic state concept as the Indonesia's main foreign policy identity, which emphasized the need for solving its territorial disputes by peaceful means. I think this one might be related to the South China Sea disputes. And secondly is to carrying out middle powermanship through active participations in various international forums. And this is definitely being seen very well. I think they want to. He wants to carry a more prominent role in ASEAN. Number third is expanding the regionalism project by strengthening the Indo-Pacific regional architecture. And number four, widening the public outreach on the foreign policy making. Prabowo, on the other hand, explains his foreign policy in 3 brief sentences. So Prabowo feels that it's important to maintain the Indonesia's bebas aktif or free and active principles. Number 2, making a more active effort to deal with global climate change. And I think that's very good for Prabowo to focus on the issue of climate change. And number 3 is protecting the rights of Indonesians migrant workers, which I think is definitely important to be highlighted as well. But I don't see it as something crucial in terms of Prabowo in talking about these 3 issues in terms of as their main agenda for foreign policy. Do you have any input on this, Gowri?
I do have a little article here about why why Washington would actually prefer Joko Widodo to win these elections as opposed to Prabowo Subianto. And it seems that unlike Prabowo, you mentioned earlier that he has a record of human rights violation. Jokowi's trouble-free background is more likely to revitalize Indonesia's democracy by adding the most desired element of governance, and by combining good democracy and good governance. They are of the opinion that foreign investors will be more certain about their profits and legal protection. And I think this definitely makes sense, because if you compare Jokowi and Prabowo, we do know that Prabowo has a record of human rights violations. We went through that earlier in the first half of our discussion, whereas Joko Widodo is more of like the clean sheet kind of guy with the good demeanor and this kind of the kind of upfront that they project to other countries could also be a huge factor in attracting foreign investors.
Yeah, and talking about foreign investment, even though this is a long shot, but I think both of the candidates also focus strongly on education. I think to them, if we want to be competitive in the long term, especially being competitive within ASEAN region itself, education is definitely the key area to focus and invest.
And surprisingly, that is what Jokowi's manifesto is about. He's focusing on emphasizing on education to come up with a more competitive and productive Indonesia.
Yeah, and when he explained about education, it's not just about schools and university, but also giving vocational training to workers and ensure that workers have enough space and time to improve themselves technically.
So what do you think of Prabowo's take on infrastructure development? Is it as crucial as economic and education?
I think both of them want to push forward a much more developed Indonesia. I think that's the reason why they want to have more investment. I mean, more investment means more structural development, especially in a lot of the region of Indonesia, and I want to highlight Jakarta as well. Infrastructure is definitely one of the key areas that is not being well structured in its cities. For example, if you've been to Jakarta, there's a lot of issue of traffic jams, or they call it macet.
I was just going to bring that up.
And
actually.
not just, and it is made even worse if there's a flood. And I experienced flood several times when I was there. So I think to improve Indonesia's economy is not just to look at capital investment or to look at more companies to come in and develop their products and services here, but also in the long run they need to focus on having a more structured Indonesia, having trains such as LRT and MRT like in Singapore and Malaysia. I think it will definitely improve the productivity of its nation.
I think speaking of Malaysia, of course, we can also relate to pretty much the same situation about the traffic jam and also the floods. Because I remember back when I was in school, my teacher asked me which state in Malaysia is the most affected one when it comes to floods? And I thought it was probably like Kelantan or Johor, but then she said no, it's KL, because of the unplanned development that just rapidly took place. And
That's true. I think rapid development has to go hand in hand with not just human development, but also structure development. So education, yes, is important, but structure and physical development is more important. And I like to highlight China on this because it's interesting that when I went to China in the year of 2008, I mean, it took me, can you imagine, it took me 23 hours to go from the southern part of China, Guangzhou, all the way to Beijing.
Wow.
It's almost the whole day.
Uh-huh.
And the moment I arrived it again, I went to China again in 2013. I was taken aback by the high-speed train. I think it's one of the fastest in the world. It took me 8 hours only, not more than that, from Guangzhou all the way to Beijing.
Wow, that's like saving almost 15 hours on your trip.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I think China is also heading the right direction in terms of to keep up with this physical development in terms of achieving a longer term of economic development.
And also, Prabowo is also his manifesto includes environmental preservation, which is another good aspect, I think, because like we mentioned earlier, along with rapid development and all, we tend to neglect the most important thing, which is the environment, which is Mother Nature. So I'm glad that he actually listed it down in his manifesto that along with infrastructure development, he's also going to concentrate on preserving the environment.
Talking about foreign policy, I think Mr. Jokowi also focused, although this is not foreign policy, but he also made his trademark to ensure that Jokowi is one of us meaning Indonesians themselves. For example, he has a trademark of walking among the public in markets and neighborhood. He also toots such as visits as part of the populist characteristic of democracy, as in listening to the people's voices and implementing it. Another of his trademark, which I thought is very interesting, is meeting the people, meeting with people. For not just among his local people in Jakarta, but also among people outside of other islands. For example, on his visits to Papua at the beginning of the campaign, he saw a lot of people standing for hours at a local market waiting to greet Mr. Jokowi.
I think going to Papua is a very good move because we know how the people in Papua often feel marginalized and like they're not part of Indonesia. So it's a very good sign that he's actually considering them as well in his political agendas.
But I have to add on about his visit to Papua. Unfortunately, he has to abort the visit because a lot of the people went to the market just to meet him, and this is just way too many people for him to handle it. But I like that he tried to show a populist characteristic by going to markets and trying to meet and greet people.
So another thing about Jokowi's foreign policy, also it seems that he wants to propose Indonesia's expanded role in the wider Indo-Pacific region, and Indonesia's positive contribution to the stability of the region may counterbalance China's increasing tendency to curb freedom of navigation both in the South China Sea and the East China Sea. I think this is a very interesting approach where they look at Indonesia's expansion and the stability of its democracy as a way to counter China's expanding territories, especially in the maritime disputes.
I see. Another thing I want to highlight is I think both of them want to be the Asian tiger, like you mentioned just now. Also, like I think they want to lead the change in ASEAN. But will they actually make changes in ASEAN itself? That is left to be, I think, to be seen when one of them will be elected.
To find out. But according to a current survey that I have here from the Jakarta Post, it seems that Prabowo is the one that's in the leading right now.
Interesting.
Do you find that shocking, or you think it's predictable?
I think it's also based on the trust level of the people. I mean, and also the amount of support that you can get. I mean, for example, Prabowo comes from a certain social class, and there's a growing middle class society in Indonesia. So I think having more Indonesian to support Prabowo is definitely something that is not surprise at all.
That's right, and we also know that his party has more funds, have more backing sponsors compared to Jokowi. But it seems that in a result of an Indo-Barometer survey conducted from June 16 to the 22nd, they interviewed 1,200 respondents in 33 different provinces, and the support for Jokowi was 46%, which is still higher than Prabowo, which was 42%. But also 11.3% of the voters up to June 29 are still undecided on who to vote for.
Mm-hmm. That's true. They are still undecided. In a way, I think in a way this would be one of the most highly contested presidential election compared to the previous ones, because I think both of them have their own advantages, and both of them have their own weaknesses as well. And I think both of them have their own target supporters, which is based on social class in a way.
Yeah, and I think this is probably one of the most popular presidential elections in Indonesia as well, and that makes it even impossible for the United States to
Intervene.
Yeah, to not.
I think
intervene.
even among the U.S. policymakers also, they would be like, I'm not sure who to support in this. I think both of them have their own advantages. But one thing I need to highlight in terms of the long-standing or the three pillars of Indonesian foreign policy is their focus on ASEAN is as its foreign policy cornerstone. So I think ASEAN is important to Indonesia. Even the ASEAN headquarters is in Indonesia. Secondly, it focuses on exploiting its soft power advantages, such as compatibility between Islam and democracy. That's true in a way. Being a Muslim majority nation is also a very secular nation in a way that it respects the freedom of religion, and it respects the people to make choices for themselves. And number three, given that economic is one of the major focus in Southeast Asia, is also focused on giving economic diplomacy as a growing priority.
Right, and another thing that Jokowi also tried to highlight through his manifesto is a mental revolution among Indonesians, and he thinks that this mental revolution is important because he feels that a lot of Indonesians lack in confidence, and he feels like if they just change themselves, the whole nation could actually revolutionize and become a great nation. And also he highlighted certain things about natural resources as well, ways to efficiently use mineral and energy resources, and also he feels that through this mental revolution they could also tackle bigger issues like the uneven economic growth, poor law enforcement, as well as other leadership and mental issues.
And one thing I want to highlight, although we already highlighted it earlier, which is on migrant workers. I think this is the first time that Indonesia is actually putting migrant workers as part of their election manifesto. For example, that both of the candidates feels that it's important to protect the rights of Indonesian who migrate to other countries for work. And of course, Malaysia is one of the countries that they focus on besides Singapore and the Gulf kingdoms, and as well as Saudi Arabia. And I think one of their key focus in terms of migrants' rights is they want to ensure that there's a balance in terms of ensure there's good regional relationship and diplomacy between the countries, and as well as the rights of their people are being protected. And I think another country that they want to heal the relationship is Australia, even though I think there's somehow there's some sort of harsh relationship between Indonesia and Australia, especially in related to the refugees issues.
I think actually Prabowo highlighted that in his manifesto, but there was nothing from Jokowi on that matter, where Prabowo feels like one of his first actions if he is elected is to actually work on repairing Indonesia's diplomatic relations with Australia, and he's going to have dialogue with Tony Abbott.
So I guess when it comes to the support for both candidates, like we said earlier, it's 50-50, almost there. But in your own personal opinion, which candidate that you would want to support, even though we are not Indonesians, but just for the sake of it?
Well, according to the polls, it seems that Prabowo is in the lead right now because he has, based on his manifesto here, I think he has a more holistic approach, if I may. And whereas Jokowi is focusing more on education, national security, and foreign policies. But Jokowi is nonetheless still very popular among the Indonesians, and I've spoken to a lot of friends who all think that Jokowi is their hope for a change, for a new reformed Indonesia. So I think it's a tough call for me to decide, but if I really have to pick one, I would think that probably Prabowo will win this one.
For me, I think what makes me interested in both candidates is the economic policy. So during the presidential debate, Prabowo will continue with his his us and them team rhetoric, similar to President Bush, saying that unlike neoliberal economies in the West, Indonesia needed to intervene to save its people from poverty. While at the same time, Jokowi pointed to his experience as the mayor and governor of Jakarta, his successes in empowering small economies by revitalizing traditional markets, explaining his approach right down to ensure the cleanliness of the markets and the availability of the parking spaces. And I think, in a way, I would say my support is towards Jokowi. I think he has experience being a mayor in Jakarta. Jakarta being the hub for Indonesia's economy, he definitely knows what he's talking about. And I agree that, but at the same time, I also see the Prabowo's point of view is important to save your people, the people of Indonesia from poverty, rather than just focus on just the GDP of the nation. So, but I feel that as a whole, Indonesia needs to sort of risen up from its current situation and become an economic power. As we all know, Indonesia has been suffering economically since, I think, a decade ago under Bambang.
Yeah, and I hope that whoever wins will try their best to carry out their manifestos and all their promises that they've made to the people. And hopefully we see a better, more improved Indonesia for the people.
Yeah, so all the best for the 9th of July. Hopefully the next presidents will bring more prosperity and successes to Indonesia.
Yeah, I think that's all the time that we have. We've reached the end of our segment for our ABC Dialogue this morning.
Okay. Stay tuned for tomorrow. You can always catch us on Facebook, Twitter, as well as on YouTube if you miss our live talk.
And of course, you can also listen to us on your TuneIn app on your smartphone, or otherwise, you can always go to www.durianasean.com.
So stay tuned for tomorrow. More news from us.